Hey, I'm Sarah.
And I'm Amy.
Welcome to United Humans, a podcast that goes into the personal lives of our 6,000 plus volunteer medics and their families.
75-year-old male, possible cardiac arrest.
My name is Gabi Friedson.
I'm Dana. This is Ronnie. We're a couple.
I'm Vicky.
United Hatzalah's only mission is saving lives, and we'll discuss how that doesn't leave room for discrimination against color, race, religion, or sexual orientation.
Let's talk about fear, trauma, pain, and connection.
Join us. Let's discuss these diverse volunteers from all across the country. Welcome back. We are so privileged to be sitting today with Esther Pamensky. Hello.
Hello.
Welcome,
Hi, Esther.
welcome. On this rainy day, and we're all dodging bullets of Corona here. So we really appreciate that you took the time to sit with us. There's a lot to talk about today. So many interesting, incredible things for you to share with the world. I think where we want to start is just a little bit about your history, where you're from, your childhood. If you want to, thought that'd be a good place to start.
Yeah. Well, I'm from New York, from Riverdale, which is in the Bronx. I wasn't religious growing up. I was born in a family that was Reform. So I didn't really have any kesher to Judaism at that point in my life. So after, I guess, my bat mitzvah, I, became completely unaffiliated. I went to high school. I went to regular high school. I went to high school in the Bronx. It was the first high school to have metal detectors.
Oh, well, I'm sure.
Yeah. So I was like the minority of my school of 4,000 people.
Wow.
Yeah. I was like 0.5% white.
Wow.
I was a real minority.
That's like incredible. Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to picture your high school picture, graduation picture.
Well, it's usually the opposite. That's why it's so
They used to call me Q-tip. Because I stuck out.
Well, do you feel like you were bullied or no?
Nah.
No, I wasn't bullied. Okay.
Nah. I mean, I do have to say that in order to stay away from the people that were actually in the gangs, you had to study really hard and get into honors classes. So I was a good student.
Wow.
So
To stay out of gangs. It's a good
not
good
to
motive.
stay out of gangs, but just like to be, I guess, like with other kids that are more my type.
Caliber.
Yeah. So, and then moving along, I went to college in Buffalo. So SUNY Buffalo, and I, after that, started working in Manhattan.
What did you study?
I studied physical therapy. I was always into medicine growing up. I was always very much into the body and biology. I was very good in science. I was actually like part of the Mount Sinai program in my high school, which is like they took a few kids that were, top in their class, and then they went to Mount Sinai Hospital and they worked like, not as assistant, but we would watch like what they would do. So they put me in the gynecological clinic.
Cool.
Very prestigious.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Then in college, I was studying physical therapy, but I wasn't disciplined enough to study so hard, so it was too much for me, so I wound up leaving and I started working. My first job I got was from my best friend at that time, her father, and I was working in Manhattan. And after like a year or so of working with him, I left. So pretty quite suddenly.
In the medical field as well, or something totally
No,
unrelated?
it was something totally unrelated, because at this point I was like trying to find myself.
Sure.
I think, because we discussed it earlier,
Yeah.
I think that I want to come back to that a little bit later. We're going to come back to the story.
Okay,
But
fine.
I want to keep hearing about your childhood, and then maybe we'll return to this point.
Yeah. And then I started working for an advertising agency. And in America, it was never good enough. Like, people were so competitive that it was about what your title was. It wasn't about who you were, It was about who you mingled with, what restaurants you went to, what bars you went to, who you were dating, where you were living. And I was never really that person, but I was trying to be like that person. So I was trying to make a square and putting it into a circle, So I was always trying to do more. So after a year, I became an account manager for another company, which was called ZDNet. I don't know if it's around anymore. It was part of Ziff Davis Publications, but it was the online portion. And that's where around September 11th happened. It was a mile away. And then after that, I was starting to become religious at that point in my life.
So you were a mile away from 9/11?
Yeah.
So what was that like for you?
So I won't forget it. It's not something that you forget. Went to work. I went to my computer. That's when Yahoo Messenger was the big thing, you know, back in my day.
What street did you
I was
work
like on 28th Street and South Avenue, like Park Avenue South. So it wasn't far away.
Not far.
And then my brother was also working in Manhattan. I had one brother. And my sister-in-law, who he was dating at the time, because we all became religious kind of together, but kind of not. She was in like another part of Manhattan, and then her sister wound up had an interview in the towers that day. So it was like a little bit terrifying because no one could find her for a bit. So I had a client, because at that point I was helping manage accounts, and they said, you know, are you okay? I just saw that one of the planes flew into one of the towers. And I'm like, haha, thanks very much for the joke, because it's something so out there, like something that you would never think could happen, and it happened. So I was just like, very funny, thanks for the joke. It was, no, do you have like a TV near you? So in the front office, you had this huge flat screen TV. I said, yeah. He said, go look. So as I'm looking, I'm going, and I remember just being in shock. I saw a second plane coming in and flying into the tower. I saw people jumping off the building. Like, this was before
you didn't hear or feel the impact being that close?
I saw it, like the smoke and stuff. But in the beginning, they had everyone stay indoors because they didn't know were there other people there. Was there, like, you know, other things going to happen? You know, because at that point they had already realized that this wasn't the only two planes that was trying to hit buildings and major points of America. They were trying to crush America. So they were, like, I guess, held us captive, so to speak, but it was like for our own safety. No one really wanted to leave because everyone was just like
scared,
trying to get a hold of people. I did lose a friend to it. She was on the 32nd floor of the first tower that hit the 31st floor, the plane.
Oh my God.
So, yeah.
A close friend?
She was close-ish. She was Jewish. No, she was not religious. She was not Jewish at all, but she was married to my friend that was Jewish. And it was very hard because I remember going around looking for her, like putting up the signs and stuff, because, I mean, we basically knew, but it's a state of denial that you're like, it can't be this such mass tragedy happening as I'm becoming religious. I was actually supposed to go to Israel a few months later. And I started struggling with, like, why am I even doing this if something like this can happen?
Right.
You know? So, yeah.
Wow. It's amazing that you continued on your journey.
My dad he had his office for 20 years next to Century 21, so on Day Street, which is like
right there.
Right there. So we've relived it in my family as well, and I came to help him like 6 months later to help work in his office, and there were still pictures up and still flowers, and everything was there for about like a year until they took everything. Until they took everything down.
I remember because I lived in Riverdale. I had to be at work at, I think, 9 o'clock in the morning, like 9 to 5. I used to come at 8:30. I would have to leave my house, and mind you, like, in normal traffic, I was probably an hour away, so I'd leave at like 8. But because after 9/11, they closed off a couple of lanes because all the emergency vehicles had to come back and forth to collect people, debris, whatever it was, I had to leave to go to work at 6:30 in the morning. Wow. It took me 2.5 hours to get 2 hours to get to work. It was crazy.
If my mother's listening to this, she's going to be like, what? But I'm going to say it anyways. Mommy, maybe just shut off the radio for a minute. But about 2 weeks, almost nothing, right? About 2 weeks after 9/11, me and my best friend decided that this was a moment in history and that we were going to be telling our grandchildren about it. And we cut school and got on a train.
Close your ears, Mom.
Yeah, seriously. And do I still have to be grounded if I'm like 35? And I
the
went
rest
and
of your
we checked it out. We went as close as we can get, which wasn't very close at that point. It was only 2 weeks later, and they were not letting us very close. But everyone was wearing masks, and
It
we
was
just
still really dusty there.
yeah, it was
and
still very
yeah.
dusty. And so we just felt like we wanted to understand what was happening with our own eyes and with our own and it was
You saw
something.
around the Trinity Church there, right? All the
Yeah, that's where we
pictures.
walked around.
Yeah.
We saw pictures and flowers, and it was really intense.
Yeah.
Wow,
Anyways,
so that's,
yes.
so that was that's like a point in your life.
That was like a point in my life that I was like, okay. And I was supposed to go to Israel like 2 weeks later or something.
Wow.
And
yeah.
so you didn't go.
Nope. I did the exact opposite. I moved to Florida.
So you left advertising.
Yeah. I just totally, I didn't, like, it was just such, I guess people do different things with shock.
Yeah.
And it was just like, like, what happened? Why? Like, I don't want to be here anymore type of a thing. So, yeah, that's what I chose to do.
So then how did you end up in Israel and religious?
So what happened was I became religious in the summer, and I became very religious because, you know, it's like they say that spark and then you take on so much really fast.
Yeah.
I was one of those. And then what happened was it was like a year where the Chagim were like Monday, like Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and then it was Shabbos.
Yeah.
Tuesday, Wednesday, and then it was Shabbos. And I told one of the people that was makarving me or helping me become religious, I was like, I'm getting burnt out. I think I need to, you know, I'll come for dinner the first night of Sukkot, but I'm going home. I need to be home.
Yeah.
They're like, no, you could do it, like rah, rah, rah. So I'm like, okay, fine. But at that point, I was getting like begrudged. You know, I wasn't doing it from a place of like, I want to do this. So then after that, and then September 11th and everything combined, I was like, you know, a jack in the box. So, you know, once you do it and then
Wound
pop.
it up.
Yeah. So it was like pop went the Esther, and
Wow.
I decided to not be religious anymore. It was way too much.
Yeah, it was too much. I saw it. We have a similar story. I didn't realize, but I took it like I saw a friend very early on pop. Like one day she was religious, and the next day she was like in Koreatown eating like barbecue. No, it was like, and
No,
she
I-
helped me, and it was like I saw it. I was like, okay, you got to be like really careful, and it's hard. You like to. I also worked in advertising. You have this New York life, and then your life totally changes. You can't do too much. It can be too much. I totally.
No, but I do remember once before I became religious, I used to see on Saturdays I'd go out with my friends to restaurants. I would see a bunch of religious people. And I remember feeling so bad for them because they weren't sitting having lunch.
Sure.
I didn't understand because in the non-religious world, it's about going out and going out. It's empty. And in the religious world, and I remember when I became religious a year later, and I'm with the other side, I'm on the other side of the fence now. So I understood what they were seeing. And I'm looking at the people eating like lunch or whatever it was in Manhattan, and I'm just like, wow, I feel so bad for them.
Sure.
It's like such a switch.
Right.
Such a switch. Wow.
So let's move it forward a little bit. So when did you end up moving to Israel, getting married?
So when I was, so I started returning a little bit in Florida, and it was really my brother and my sister-in-law that really convinced me to come back and go to Israel. You know, I remember my sister-in-law saying, like, you know, what are you doing there? You're just riding roller coasters. Like, I understand, whatever, like, went on. Oh. And she just said, come on, you never know. In a year, you could be married. And I'm like, I doubt that, but okay. So I packed my bags and I moved back to New York for like a month. And right before Pesach, I landed in Israel and I went to Iyat.
Iyat.
I know. Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
Too.
I did
Cool.
a video for them once.
Oh, really?
Yeah?
With Bonnie. Bonnie.
Yeah, but Rebbitzin Weinberg was
Yeah,
the...
yeah.
Right. My aunt is very involved with Iyat.
Yeah?
So okay,
Should we explain what Iyad and the
it's
kind of
like
program is?
it's a program to help out tshuva, like
Yeah.
for people to become religious, like Neve.
Yeah.
Maybe people are more
Yeah.
familiar with.
Yeah,
Yeah,
something
they
like
teach
that,
more
or
about
Aish.
Hashkafa and how to be like a strong, like Jewish woman, and for you to understand like what the switch is going to be like when you decide to have a Jewish home,
Wow, that's nice.
which nothing can prepare you for.
So thank God you
Wow.
got married.
Yes, I got married. I remember I was working at the time for Pamela Clayman. I was
Ah, of
working in her
course.
kitchen.
You're working for Pamela.
Yeah, I was
okay.
one of the first people in her. I remember meeting her, and I'm like, I have to work for her. She was looking to hire people for her kitchen in her new apartment in the old city. So I got very close to them, Pamela and Abba.
Yeah.
And then I met my husband around that time, like a year and a half later,
What year is this?
like 19 years ago.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm not like good with dates or names
No,
for that
that's all
matter.
good.
Sorry.
So you're living in Israel now for 19 years.
Yeah.
Married. How many children do you have?
I'm married 18 years, but I have 4 kids.
Wow, beautiful.
The oldest is 16 and the youngest is 8.
Just so we're on the record, she doesn't look old enough to be the mother of a 16-year-old. Okay. Now that's been stated.
Don't worry, people have called me Bubby. It's okay.
Is your husband also Balchuva?
He's from young. He was from when he was 10 years old because there was a 10-year age gap between him and his brothers.
Interesting. Okay.
So he saw his brothers becoming religious. So as the little kid, like wanting to be like his big brothers, he became religious. So it was nice.
So I want to kind of jump into the years of where you really went through enormous tragedy. And what I find interesting is that we've seen this, I think Amy could also agree with me, like we've seen so many people talk about tragedy, and that every time that happens, people have 2 choices, right? They could change their life for the better, or they can just lock themselves in a room and say, I'm done. And so I already know that I'm incredibly impressed by the choices that you made. But if you are comfortable with it, we would love for you to walk us through the incredibly difficult times that you went through, and where United Hatzalah folded into that experience and how it mingled into your recovery.
Okay. Where do you want me to start from?
We'll start with a year. What year are we talking about when first with your brother, right?
Okay, so years. Okay, so my brother is going on 11 years. So 11 years ago he passed away. That was in 2010. So 2 years before that.
In
So
Israel? Was he living in Israel?
he was
with his
living in
wife?
Israel too.
Okay.
Like I said, we kind of flip-flop becoming religious.
Okay.
So when he saw me living in Israel with my husband, we started off in the old city. He decided that that's the type of life he wanted, and so did my sister-in-law, and they moved also to Israel as well. And they also were wowed about like how people were living, and they had a friend getting married there, so it was nice. Like they were close by. But I remember one night, and at this point, I had 2 kids, Chaim and Yocheved. I got a phone call. It was a Thursday night, and they were like, "You have to go to the hospital now. Your brother's really sick." And I'm like, "Okay." They're like, "No, he's really sick." And they're like, he just go. So I dropped everything and I left because my sister-in-law at that point had 4 kids, and she couldn't go. She had 4 babies. Like one was a baby, like a 2-month-old maybe. So I ran to the hospital, and they showed like that his leukocytes were super low, that he was like already, I don't know, like he had leukemia basically. He just overnight, he was well one day, and then a few weeks later he wasn't.
Wow.
So I remember being in denial. I'm like, you just ate too much aspirin, and he's like, no. He's like, don't be dumb. He said, I have cancer. And then we were going into the hematology, and he's like, you see, I have cancer. He's like, just deal with it. That was my brother's attitude. He was always the type of guy that would be like, just deal with it and move on. Learn from it, move on. That was his thing. So, he had cancer, and it was very shocking. And I remember just, thinking to myself, what now? What's going to happen now? So what now was he fell while he was in the emergency ward, and he started bleeding internally. And they couldn't find the source of the bleeding. So they had to put him in the ICU because he was losing so much blood. And so as fast as they were giving him transfusions, it was coming out the other end. And he looked like he was 9 months pregnant because all the byproducts from the fluids was just in his stomach. So I remember a lot of people were starting to daven for him. And my sister-in-law was, also just like, what's going on here? And she was there with him. She wanted to be there with him.
What was his name?
You
don't have to say.
Eliezer. Raphael Eliezer.
What?
Raphael Eliezer.
Raphael.
They added Raphael at this time when he was really
Okay.
sick, and they were trying all different things to try to like get him to stop bleeding, And I remember right before Shabbos, like a Wednesday or Thursday night, we all went to the kotel, and they were like, you have to prepare for the worst. And I'm like, okay, at this point, my parents were trying to call me, and I didn't have the heart to tell them what was going on. They lived in New York. And my sister-in-law asked me not to say anything. So out of respect, I, wanted to honor her because I don't even know what she was going through. This is her husband of, how long, and they were together for how long before they became religious. It was not easy for her and 4 kids. So I remember that Shabbos, I told my husband, if my brother is going to die, I want to be there with him because my parents aren't here. They don't know anything yet. And my sister-in-law couldn't really sit next to him by his side because she had 4 kids. So she was able to find somewhere to stay nearby, and I was in the hospital. And I remember I had a problem with praying because I had over-prayed when I had become too religious too fast. And I remember my sister-in-law was like, you really have to pray. And I'm like, no, I don't. I could just say in my head. And she's like, no, you do. So I said, fine. I said, God, if you're really up there and, praying is really important, I said, I'm going to finish Sefer Tehillim in English because my Hebrew is much worse than it is. It's better now. And I said, you'll help me with him. And they had this protocol that they were going to intubate him to calm his body down to hopefully stop the bleeding. And I said, Sefer Tehillim, and then my sister-in-law came. She wanted to spend time with him, so I was with my nieces at that time so we switched. When we switched back over, it was like an hour to Shkia, and I'm like, I have to finish. I finally finished the Sefer Tehillim, and not 5 minutes later, they said the bleeding stopped. Let's just take away the intubation, and it was like,
wow.
I'm like, okay, I heard you.
Wow.
Got it. Davening, yes.
Wow.
Important. Still struggle with the praying part today, but I do know it's important. So yeah.
We all struggle.
A lot. I know. I was gonna say I also struggle. Tehillim is very hard.
Yeah, it really
Hebrew
is.
hard. I also read in
And it
English.
was also all the prayers of everybody else, So it was when he came out of it, that Friday, that next week, he asked to go home, he wants to be with his kids, his family. And I remember people looking at him they were couldn't believe that he was still alive after the whole thing that he went through. And then he started chemotherapy.
And then how many more months was he still with us, with you?
About 2 years.
2 years, wow.
He struggled very hard. He had a bone marrow transplant. He started a blog about just being the best person he could be. And
wow.
It's funny because the last few weeks of his life, I think he really got it because he started becoming really religious. And I remember I had just had Yaakov, my third. The whole time that I was taking care of my brother, I'm the only other sibling, so I was taking care of my brother,
sister-in-law, nieces,
and my sister-in-law, my nieces, and doing the best I can, and my sister-in-law also. And we had a lot of help with the community, which was amazing. The community stepped up and totally helped out, sent my sister-in-law meals, and help with the babysitting. I just remember the last few weeks of his life, he started becoming very, very, very religious. It was he got it. And I remember when he had to, at that point, he was going to Tel Shomer Hospital. And I needed to get a visa for Yaakov because he was just born. And he said, so he gave us a ride, me and my husband and Yaakov. And I'll never forget this. This really stood out in my mind also, a very big game changer of how I think. And we came back to the hospital. He goes, look, I might have to stay in the hospital. If I have to stay in the hospital, you need to drive the car back home. And I said to him, but I don't want you to be in the hospital. And he looked at me and he goes, you're selfish. And I was like, what? I'm like, I don't want you to be in the hospital. I'm selfish? And he goes, yeah, you're selfish. And I said, why? He's like, you know what I want? I want what God wants. And if God wants me to be in the hospital and he thinks that I need to be in the hospital, I have a bag packed in the trunk so that I don't have to put, my wife, that was my sister-in-law, out of the way that she has to do things for me. He had a pillow and he had his suitcase. And he's like, I'm ready to go in if I have to. He's like, so if you want to do anything for me, he's like, you say Tehillim. He's like, but accept the fact that this is what God will want. And I just didn't know what to do.
That's incredible. I can't even.
Definitely silenced. But that was who he was. Well, the whole time he was sick, he would see the Ma'on ladies that were taking out the garbage in the pouring rain. He would make me go out and he would make me ask the woman, does she want to ride? Because he couldn't see people in pain. And that's who he was.
Wow. And he passed away in what year?
He passed away in 2010.
2010.
Yeah, I believe so. 2010.
Okay,
Well,
so
10
there was-
years.
So there was some time.
2011, actually, because this is his
2011.
11th year. So, yeah, he spent 2 weeks, the whole Pesach, he spent 2 weeks in intubated because he was just that sick. His oxygen levels were just not doing well, so they had to intubate him. And my sister-in-law stayed with him with her mother, and I took the girls with me for Pesach because I wanted them to be, together. And Isru Chag, for the second days, I got a phone call, like, this is it. Your brother is dying. His liver is failing. It's the end. You need to come. And I'm like, oh, this is wonderful. How am I going to say this to my parents? And I remember I was with my mother-in-law because it just so happened that a lot of my husband's side of the family, who was a huge support for me, I can't thank them enough, especially my in-laws, who really took me in. And I remember just breaking down. And my poor father-in-law was there because everyone else one was paying the bill, one was here. It was like the first time I was able to sit down for like a half an hour. And, he gave me a hug. And my mother-in-law came down, and I was like, it's the end. And she's like, okay, let's get in a cab and go. The slowest cab ride ever. The slowest cab ride ever. I even asked the guy if I could get into the car. I'm like, my brother is not doing, I don't know, he was just in his little world of la 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 and just driving really slow. But
Did you make it?
Yes, I made it. I made it, and I was able to say goodbye to him. And I was able to call my parents, who oddly enough had sent a letter to the blog saying, I know that you guys did the best that you could, and we're not mad. It was like they knew.
So
A
I feel
mother
like-
has this
Yeah,
intuition.
intuition. Wow, like Dayenu, like if that was just your story alone, that would be enough. Like that was a tremendous amount to have gone through.
Plus, the kids lived with me for a little while they
Wow.
were trying to sort themselves out.
Wow. And yet,
And yet,
Dayenu, right? Like so what happened next?
so I get a phone call. So finally, my husband says to me, okay, fine, finally we go to Toronto, nothing's happening. I said, why did you say that? Half an hour later, I get a phone call. Your father was hit by a car. I don't know what happened. They sent it to me through Facebook because they didn't know where I was. They didn't know my phone number, whatever. It was like a family member. And they said, you need to come to New York. So I called my mother. She didn't even know because they kept trying to call people,
Wait,
the
so what
police.
year is this? How much after is this? After this, your brother passed away?
2013.
So it's 2 years later.
Yeah, a year and a half, 2 years later, yeah. So I remember, I'm just like, okay, I don't know what's happening. And I told my mother to go to the hospital right away, where, just to find out what the story was. So in the meantime, I'm like, Abraham, my father just got hit by a truck. This was the beginning of Elul. And I said, I have to go. It took me, because there was like a storm in the skies, it took me 12 hours to get from Toronto to New York.
Oh my god.
And I remember in the middle, I called my mother to check in, and she was panicking because he was hemorrhaging in his brain. They needed to give him emergency surgery. They didn't know if he would survive it because he was had heart issues, from the past. He was a healthy person, a healthy heart issue person. And I said, obviously you need to do whatever you can to save him. And so I didn't know what I was going into when I was going to the hospital. I don't know if my father was living. I don't know if my father was dying. And the airport kept getting delayed. And I'm like, I'm getting to the hospital. That's it. So finally I get to the hospital. And they had to amputate a couple of my father's toes because apparently it was a truck that hit him. And the guy was texting. And the guy wasn't looking at the road. He was looking for his friend. And my father was crossing the street. And he was not a small man. He's 6 feet tall, And when he saw that he had hit my father, he basically ran over him. And then he got nervous and went into shock and backed up. So I'm like, oh, okay.
Ivan Mashiach treated a girl with the same exact story.
Yeah,
2 years
so,
ago.
yeah. So I was just like, okay. So he was out of surgery. And we had to wait to see what was going to happen. And basically my whole time my whole Elul Zman was being in the hospital, going back to Israel, seeing my sister-in-law get married while my father was not doing well, having a really crazy dream, like about my brother and my father, like waiting for me. I went back to New York with my 2.5-year-old. My father passed away on Yom Kippur.
On Yom Kippur.
On Yom Kippur. And we had to sign a do not resuscitate because they found him, like he was brain dead basically. So the Rav that I went to told me not to resuscitate. And with my 2.5-year-old son, my mother was already like finished because she had lost her husband. Now she lost her son, her husband. So I had to really take control of everything, and I had to plan the funeral.
And your husband was in Israel?
Yes, he was taking care of the other kids. The other
You
two
mentioned your
kids.
sister-in-law was remarried at this point?
At this point, she was remarried, and I remember, like, it was Rosh Hashanah time that they didn't really have Shabbat Brachas, but I remember helping them cook some. I don't remember. It was like a wave of whatever. And so then I buried my father, but he was able to have a religious burial.
Wow.
And even though it was pouring rain, that next day, the 2 days later that my father was buried, which is another story in itself, a lot of people showed up to, like, people that didn't know me. We had a minyan, and it was incredible.
Wow.
Like from a place I didn't even know. No, they were buried in New Jersey. He was buried in New Jersey. Like, they had bought like a whole bunch of plots where the family could be together. So.
So Dayenu.
Yeah, so Dayenu.
It's a lot. It's a lot of tragedy, and I can't even imagine. But at what point in this journey did United Hatzalah open up to you?
So
opportunity?
While I was in Avelis, I was told about
Avelis is the mourning period.
The mourning period for a year, because I couldn't sit the 7 days of Shiva. I wasn't able to see my nieces for a while because my sister-in-law needed to get into, become a unit. And it was hard because I looked like a lot like my brother. So I was poskined that I needed to not keep full laws of the year. Sorry. Okay. Basically, I was very, very broken, and I needed to find something. And I remember seeing, become a certified medic. Huh. And there's a class with Ari Deutsch, so the NREMT. And I said, okay, I want to become a medic. I want to join Hatzalah. And that's how I did it. Because it was in English.
Did you know anyone in Hatzalah already?
I knew nothing about Hatzalah. Okay. I just knew that I always loved the medical field. I always wanted to be a nurse, a surgeon, anything. And I knew that I never was able to. And living in Israel, to do it in Hebrew was like a joke for me, because no way. Now I can. But so Hatzalah, the NREMT was the perfect thing. And I just remember.
How many years ago was this?
2.5, 3 years ago.
So I'm just trying to put it. How many years after is that after your father passed away? I lost track of
it.
It
was already 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, 3-4 years. I kept looking for something, and I just felt empty. And
those years, I'm sure, were so hard after your brother and then your father.
But you have a choice. Either you're gonna lock yourself in a room, or you're gonna say, okay, what happened to me sucks. I'm gonna be upset about it for a while. I'm gonna take the lessons that I learned, and I'm gonna keep walking.
Wow.
And that's what I chose to do.
And do you feel that Hatzalah was that avenue for you in terms of just keep swimming?
Yeah.
In what way? So maybe talk us about the course and the people you met. And
so the course Ari taught. First of all, he's funny, so it's like
everyone loves Ari.
He was our second podcast.
Yeah. So he's always good at trying to make things interesting and keeping the crowd in a funny way too. So so I was doing the course, and I just remember saying finally I'm doing something for me. I spent so much time in, I guess, trauma mode, in emergency mode of life of 8 years I think I had it. So I just enjoyed every minute of the experience, and I'm it was hard, the course, because there was a lot of hours, there was a lot of studying, and my kids couldn't understand what I was doing, and no one really understood what I was doing until I remember after I graduated, my father-in-law called me, and he goes, I never understood what about Hatzalah and becoming a medic until in the summer he was at my brother-in-law's cottage, and my brother-in-law has kids that are married, and it was their grandchild. All of a sudden, she's eating pine nuts, which she used to eat already. She's a little girl, 4 years old, went into anaphylactic shock. And who happened to have been there but one of their close friends who happens to be on Hatzalah.
Where is this?
Wow.
This was in Toronto. And he basically saved her life. He was able to get on thing with a paramedic that was across the river, whatever it was, and they saved her life. He goes, but this past Shabbos, he said that, my great-granddaughter had an anaphylactic, like a bad reaction to something, and they, if it wasn't for him, she would have died.
Wow.
Like, really wasn't, like, it would have taken a half an hour for an ambulance to come to where they were.
So everyone was very supportive and
Yeah, he said,
happy.
I understand now what you do.
Wow. So what's your experience been like the last 2.5 years being part of Hatzalah and the women's unit?
So I made a lot of friends, a couple of really close friends. The experience of just going on calls and like just a level of understanding of like never ever judge what you see on the outside, because you never know what's going on behind closed doors. Doing CPRs, receiving births, having very interesting situations with receiving births. Like one time a foot came out. Yeah, that was a good one.
Oh wow! So
Yeah,
is a breech.
This is
baby.
like when but it wasn't fully, like, it was like the whole, like, it wasn't normal breech. It was like crazy story breech. And like I went on the Natan. It was, yeah. And it also
That's
ties
scary.
into when my son was 16 months old, he was burned. And also learning, like, how to really help people, not only physically, but there's always another patient in the room. That's another thing that Hatzalah taught me, Ari. He's like, for the person that needs to be treated, there's always a hysterical person on the side that
Trauma.
also needs help. And it's true.
Are you part of the trauma unit?
Yeah, like I still have to finish taking a test, but
Wait, so you just mentioned about your son. When did that happen, that your son was burnt?
so
was 16 months old,
he
you
was
said?
16 months old, which was 16 years ago. He was my oldest, and he got burned from a kumkum Erev Shabbos. And we spent that Shabbos in the hospital. It was probably one of the 2 or 3 times I've ever heard my mother-in-law yell in her entire life, my entire marriage, actually, not her life. So once I heard her yell, I knew that there was a problem. And I remember went to the hospital with this 3rd-degree burn, and I didn't know what to do. But I knew that the hospital wasn't the right avenue because he had thrown up on himself because he was so hysterical. And they finally, after him crying hysterically for 5 hours, had given him morphine. He threw up on himself, and I asked them to change the bandage, and they're like, we're not changing the bandage because that's not our protocol. I'm like, but he threw up on the bandage. And they're like, no, it's not our protocol. I'm like, okay, I'm taking him out of the hospital. And Rebbetzin Weinberg at the time had this whole thing because she burned her face. So I...
Who's Rebbetzin Weinberger?
Weinberg from IAT.
Oh, okay.
Rabbi Noach's wife.
Okay.
And I took him to her every day and to my doctor, and we put him on antibiotics because I'm in the middle when it comes to treating burns or anything. There should be a natural way, but there should always be some type of a medical way also.
Sure.
Let's just take it back a notch. From this experience, for those who are just hearing this for the first time, I know this already, so for me,
Yeah.
the chronological order is making sense, but for someone who's just tuning in, so from this experience with your son, you became a burn expert of sorts.
Yeah,
In
like,
So-
Hatzalah.
not in Hatzalah. I mean, I just like people will.
So can you tell us about that? What your work has been in this field and how that does fold into Hatzalah with?
Yeah, so it's been 15 years now since my son has been burned. And I remember my husband and I agreeing that, like, if someone were to get a burn, like, we want to be there to help them because really it's a field of, like, you don't know. It's like an abyss of black. Like, you really don't know what to do. So basically, if someone gets a burn or something, for example, there was a call where someone got burned, and it was, like, in my area. And I went to the call because it happened to be someone I knew really well. And I just wanted to see how bad the burn was because, there are times that you have to go to the hospital for a burn, and there are times that you don't need to go, but, the protocol is to tell them to go. So there were other medics there as well. So they were, like, telling her that she should go, but then it was like a whole chaos balagan. In the end, she decided not to go. She asked me to help her, and I was able to help her with her son.
And what do you do can you talk us through? I actually got a bad burn on Friday, but it's not
Vitamin E oil.
Vitamin E.
So Mrs. Green has a burn cream. Like, a lot of people know about her. She's like this big person in the religious world. And I also have come up with my own burn cream after extensive research of 15 years of looking at different oils about scarring. And I helped the family,
Is it like an organization?
Me?
Yeah. Or
No,
is it word of
I-
mouth?
It's a lot of people are now sending to me because there is really a lack of people that know what to do. So my whole thing is I like to be physically involved, and I show people what to do and how to do it so that they can, I ask to give it over because it needs to be an awareness, and one person is not able to do it. So I'm very happy to share what I learned, through my experience. So I started making my own creams as well.
Wow.
So
And you sell them to people?
right now, no. Like right now, it's just like I give to them, and I treat them whatever they need. But I don't know what's going to be down the line. I'm always open.
So do you have like a reputation as like the burn expert lady?
Yeah.
And how does that intertwine with your work in Hatzalah? Like, do people know, like, if there's a burn call, like, does the dispatch center know, like, if there's a burn, call Esther Pamensky?
Not yet. Like one of the medics does know. I don't think he realized like how much I did know. It's not like something that you want to just send to people if they really don't know what they're doing. So it's more of like building that trust of knowing, and slowly it's starting to be like that.
Wow.
So I want to. I didn't mention this in the beginning, but we did a blog post together about a year and a half ago. And it was in the middle of the second lockdown, and we spoke a bit about different kind of calls that you went on during Corona time, and you went quite deep into domestic violence kind of calls. You would say that there was like a Shabbat or Motzei Shabbat, there was like 7-8 calls in one night, and you went too many possible suicides. And I just wanted to go, I want to jump now to Corona, and I know that you were very active, and it was probably makes sense that it was in like the first year or so that you started volunteering, and has things calmed down? Now we're like in the middle of this Omicron wave. Is violence going up? Can you speak a bit more about that?
Okay, so the violence is just there. Like it's now more because of the flu and the Omicron variant. It's more people calling because of the shortness of breath. That's been like an increase, like majorly, which is why the hospitals are so full.
Yeah.
But there's still a lot of calls with violence. People are traumatized from what they went through with all the lockdowns.
Yeah.
People getting scared and mishandling situations because they didn't know better. Unfortunately, abuse. Children getting abused, adults getting abused, families getting abused, people getting divorced. Like it's been pretty crazy.
And it's not. Is it in religious homes, non-religious homes, across the board?
It's across the board. It really is. It's not one or the other.
And how do you feel like as a Hatzalah volunteer you were able to help in these kind of situations over the last 2 years?
So as a person that went through something, one of my jobs I spoke about with my best friend, my ex-best friend, after a year, my friend's father had taken me out to dinner.
So wait, this is the job that you talked about at the
The
beginning.
first job at the very, very beginning. And he took me out to dinner, and he was like, it's my birthday. I want to go to Atlantic City, which is like Las Vegas kind of, but small. And he's like, I want you to come with me, and I want to share a room with you. And I'm like, you do realize that I'm the same age as your daughter? He goes, yeah, I know, but once a year, my wife and I have this agreement that I go away and I take someone. I'm like, okay, great. I'm putting in my notice right now. And he said to me, like, well, you're not going to find a different, how they try to put you down. You're not going to find a different job, whatever. I said, watch me. And that's when I found my second job. And I realized that through that, like, I have, I guess, a certain sensitivity to pick up on certain things when it comes to abuse or violence. Someone wants to talk about it or not, I'm able to kind of go down to their level because in some way, it was Me Too, through that Me Too movement.
Me too.
Right, no, of
No,
course.
it isn't. Yeah.
And unfortunately, in certain circles, it's more like, if it's within a certain age group, then it's because the kids are curious. And I'm like, no, that's just not okay. Like, it's not because they're curious. It happened, and we need to deal with it. And, so when I go to certain calls of abuse or whatever, I can tell the person, like, this is not something you asked for. It's really not. And it took me many years to realize this. It's not something I asked for, and people need to understand that. Like, it's out there, and it needs to be understood that it's not something that was asked for or out of curiosity, that people do certain things to each other. It has to.
They shouldn't blame themselves.
They should not blame themselves. And that's the hardest thing for anyone that has been through any type of abuse. They think that they've asked for it. And it's not true.
So can you give us an example, without obviously, while still protecting anyone's names, of course, but of an example where you were on a call where either it involved abuse or domestic violence?
Okay, so I was on a call of a person that was trying to commit suicide. And there was like a special home with this person that I think is like some type of an angel, because she takes in all these problematic kids. And I remember getting to the house, and the person stopped us and explained to us a little bit, and she only spoke English, so it was good that I was there. And I remember going, and they were trying to, convince her to take her medicine to calm this person down, and and to put the knife down, because the person was trying to kill themselves. So finally, they were able to calm the person down enough, and I was just around, which made the person comfortable, because there was a woman there. And then the advanced ALS people came, which is the Advanced Life Saving Unit, which can administer medicine. But because the person was 18 years old, they couldn't really administer medicine. So what happened was she finally agreed to go to the hospital because the person was out of control. The person was able to calm down, but refused to take the medicine. So it was me and another person there on the call. And the other team went down, and I said, okay, I'll wait for you to come back, because I think they were going to get a chair and something else. So as they left, the person took a knife from the kitchen and tried to stab herself. So me and the other person needed to try to restrain the person. And the other ambulance team came, called the doctor. You have to call the doctor in charge if you need to get special permission for something. And they gave permission to give this person something to calm them down, because it would have been a hard ambulance ride for them.
Right.
So, and other calls of,
Wow.
Relationship abuse. Someone was trying to choke another person.
Wow.
So.
No, it's very, very hard years.
Yeah. The hardest is when it's a child, though, that's getting
I was
abused.
going to say, what's the hardest call for you?
The hardest calls for me is, and I don't go to them often because they're very challenging, is when I see a child, because they're innocent. They're not doing anything to ask for it. So yeah, I don't really go to those calls, but.
How often are you going on call? Where do you live?
I live in Givat HaMivtar.
Givat HaMivtar.
Yeah.
Okay. So Jerusalem, for those of you who don't know what that is. And how often are you going on calls?
Now it's a little bit more often that my kids are older, and they understand now, and they have a appreciation for what I do. I remember we went away in Hanukkah time, Mommy, don't take your bag. I'm like, okay, fine. What happens? My son gets a burn.
Oh, no.
I said, well, my bag is, Mommy, that's it. You have to remember to bring your bag everywhere we go.
So do you think they'll want to be medics when they grow up?
So my little son that definitely keeps me on my toes. He just fractured 2 fingers. He's had 12 stitches. He was one of my first calls. So yeah, he wants to be a medic. It's very cute. Wow. He bought a little first aid kit that he brings to school now.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Cute. Wow.
But it's nice because also the neighbors appreciate it, because they come up to me and they say, it's so nice that my kids get to see you running on a call, because it's pure hesed. We don't get paid for this.
Right.
So it's volunteer.
So we have to wrap up, but I want to end with one, I want to point out that you are a religious woman living in Jerusalem. And when you get a call, you don't not go because of that. You don't not go because you're a woman. You definitely don't go because, there's if it's an Arab, or if it's a not religious, or it's ultra Hasidish, I don't know, like an ultra Hasidish man. Can you talk for 2 minutes about how that works? As a religious woman out there in the field, are you, as we've been talked about in the past, like it's a man's territory and how we're like breaking through that.
Yeah.
Could you talk to us a little bit about that?
This was definitely harder in the beginning, very much not accepted in the beginning, especially going to the more religious neighborhoods. But I think now it's becoming realized that, there is a need for both man and woman. If it's an ultra Hasidic neighborhood or ultra from neighborhood and I know it's a man's call, I'll be respectful and I won't go out of respect for them. But if it's a CPR and I know that I'm going to be the first one there, I will go. But if I see that there's already 4 people running toward it, I will step away and just stay back and make sure that, if they need me, I'm there. As far as the not religious, they get shocked when they see a from woman coming in.
Wow, I can imagine.
Yeah, they're like, because I remember once I went to a call, we were away up north, like near Tel Aviv, Ra'anana area.
Yeah.
And I remember going to a call, and they just looked at me like I had 2 heads. They're like, you're a medic? I'm like, yeah. And she's like, wow, that's incredible. Like, go you, And a lot of women say that it's inspiring to see, and from women, they get very inspired. So I don't think it really, you just have to have a level of respect for others. So obviously, if it's a man's mikvah and it's a call, I'm not going to run into the mikvah to the call. Just not okay. And that did happen. There was a call once, and it happened to have been a mikvah, but no one knew that there was a mikvah there. And there was one other medic.
Mikvah is like a ritual bath.
A ritual bath thing. And the person wound up passing out, and I just said, I'm not. So I called the Moked, and I said, you need to send someone else because, I'm not going in. But I did tell the person I'm going to wait outside until someone comes just in case.
Right.
So it's a level of respect.
Right.
That's a nice approach.
And I think for the men also, they're beginning to have that approach for birth, right? Where it used to just be, there's someone in labor and the men just walk in. But now it's like, wait, if I could wait 1 more minute and there's a woman who's going to be here, or 2 women that are going to be here, from what I hear, they're becoming much, much more.
Yeah, or if we come, they do take a step back and they'll give us an update of what is going on, which is nice because then it also makes the woman feel much better.
I gave birth at home. I might have said this on the podcast before, but my second birth was a accidental home birth, and this was 6 years ago. So let's just say there weren't enough female medics as there would have been if it was today. So I really understand. The house was too crowded.
I do have to say that these births that happen in the house are not planned. It just happens.
Yes.
It really just happens, and it's good to be able to be there.
Absolutely. Have you been to a lot of births?
Quite a few.
Oh, wow.
And miscarriages. I know. I don't want to go through another heavy topic now, but I know that we spoke about this in the blog post as well. That you really like to be there to support women in that time of need.
I mean, if I have to choose between a birth and if someone's having a baby or someone's miscarrying, I personally would rather go to the miscarriage because that's the woman needs you. Like, she needs to help get cleaned up. Like that sensitivity that other people might not have. I remember on one Shabbos I was going to a call, a woman was miscarrying. And then on my way back, there was a woman in labor. And it just struck me of how crazy is that? And then I went to a bar mitzvah, and the person, and I was in Givat Zev, and the person's like, I saw, the person's like, what were you doing on Shabbos that you came in your car? And I'm like, they were like, is that person okay? And I said, yeah, she's fine. Like, I'm obviously not going to give over information that's confidence. But she said, it's amazing that you were able to come to this call when it seemed like that woman really needed you.
Wow, yeah, for sure. Okay, one last question for me, and maybe Amy has one last question. We got to wrap up. But I need to ask you, what do you do for self-care? You're obviously someone who's giving and giving and giving and giving and so selfless. What do you do for yourself?
I honestly like to go on ambulance shifts.
Why did I have a feeling she was going to say that?
Wow.
They all say that. They're all crazy.
No, sometimes I'll get a manicure or... I'll get a pedicure.
So if you ever ask someone, what do you do for self-care? I go on an ambulance shift. It's
my husband's like, you don't want to get him. I'm like, no, I'd rather go on an ambulance shift.
Because that's your time. It's everyone needs their creative or giving outlet, and that's what gives them strength. So some people, it's a creative thing. But I understand that it's time away from your husband, it's time away from your kids. That's your time, and you choose what you want to do with that time.
Yeah.
So that's your self-care.
Yeah.
And an occasional manicure.
Yeah.
Wow, amazing. Amy?
So I do want to say one last thing. So we ended the blog post about a year ago. It was towards the end of the second lockdown, and you said you had a message to the public, and you said, the most important message I want people to know is that they should really try to stay strong because they are not the only ones going through a hard time right now, although it might seem like it. I've had a very hard time in my life, and I just chose to be positive about it and do mitzvahs with it. You get to choose.
Yeah.
Do you feel that same way today? We're in a hard time now. Everyone's catching corona for the second time. Bidudim. It's not easy right now. So do you feel that same? Do you feel that same way?
Yeah, I really do. I just take the situation. If you need to cry, cry. If you need to punch a pillow, punch a pillow. If you need to drink a bottle of wine, drink a bottle of wine.
Or two.
But yeah, or
not.
or not, you know. But whatever you need to do for yourself, sometimes when lockdown, I used to lock myself in the bathroom because that's the one place my kids couldn't get to me.
Oh my God, yeah. We all
So
know that.
We all literally like, no, mommy has a stomach ache.
yeah,
Still? Yeah.
yeah,
On my phone, hiding in the shower.
yeah, totally. So whatever that is for the person, just know that there are other people going through it, and just to stay strong, even though it's hard, and just see the good from it, and just take that good, and just keep walking.
Wow, unbelievable.
It's so inspiring.
Beyond. Anytime I'm talking to people who've been through so much tragedy as yourself, and they're just like head up, shoulder straight, you know, trying to give back to the world, I don't know. I'm blown away, but I'm so humbled, and I'm
Very humbled.
Yeah.
That's the right word. Humbled.
so thank you so much for sharing your story, which I'm
Wow.
sure wasn't easy to rehash
Yeah.
again.
Yeah.
But we appreciate so much taking your time.
Thank you so
Yeah.
much, Esther. I'm happy to finally meet you, and
Yeah.
I feel like I learned a lot more about your life and your stories I didn't know before, and I think I'm going to take a lot with me.
Me
Actually,
too.
yeah.
Chazak v'yamatz. You should
Yeah.
just continue.
Well, thank you for having me here,
Thank you, Esther.
and thank you to all the people in Hatzalah, because, you know, it really helped me.
Beautiful. Hope you enjoyed the episode.
Be
Thanks so
safe,
much.
everyone.
Thank you so much for listening to the United Humans podcast.
Share this with a friend, subscribe, and we already know you're going to leave us a positive review, so we'll just thank you now for that.
Bye.
Adios.